I love that we're starting with laughter, and I love our guest today. Keoni Carthen is the Director of Operations at Element Q Healing Center and so much more. He has an incredible journey that I'm excited to dive into both personally and professionally. Obviously, his full bio will be in the show notes. Welcome to the Element Q podcast. I'm your host, TJ Woodward, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for this empowering journey. Each week, we shine a light on the authors, thought leaders, therapists, coaches, and healers of all types who are making a difference in the LGBTQ plus community. Together, we honor those who came before us, the courageous and resilient trailblazers who stood for our rights and recognition. Their strength laid the foundation we stand on today. Here, we celebrate their legacy by diving into the stories, insights, and tools that inspire gentleness, healing, and transformation. So get ready to be uplifted and empowered. This is the Element Q podcast. Keoni, welcome to the show.
Hi, TJ. How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have had some really great conversations off camera. The only difference now is we're going to have this conversation with some other folks who might be listening or watching, who I'm guessing either will relate to this conversation or might even have some sort of expanded awareness through this conversation. So as we always do, before we hit record, I asked you what was kind of present for you in terms of the conversation around healing within the LGBTQ community. And I love that you came up with really there's healing within the community and as a community that needs to happen. So I'm curious if you can kick us off with what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, I mean, just to be very frank and open, right now we're going through a lot of attacks within our community and on our community. And I think with some of that, we need to band together as a community and take care of one another. I mean, our trans folks, I myself am non-binary, trans-masculine. So I feel this as well on a personal level. For folks that aren't living in states that maybe necessarily want to protect trans rights, that's definitely under attack right now. And so as a community, I really feel like it's important to band together and stick with one another, as we don't know what they're going to go after next from the government. So it's definitely a difficult time. I'm always about building community wherever you're at. So even if that's, and I think that for me is how we heal the community, is continuing to reach out to folks that maybe we haven't reached out to before or haven't thought about reaching out to, and just continuing to build that with one another.
Yeah, because I think there is a tendency, and this isn't unique to our community, it can be in a lot of different communities, but there can be fragmentation based on a lot of different things, right? I'm a gay white man of a certain age, so I might tend to hang out with gay white men of a certain age. Not that I generally do. It's funny, I look at my friend group and I'm like, oh, I do have a few of those folks, but I at least hope that I am reaching out and making connections with people who have different life experience. And I think one of the things that I see happening, whether we say from outside the community or within the community, is this broad brushstroke. We all have the same experience, LGBTQIA plus. And we know it's not true for a lot of different reasons. So, very popular now to talk about intersectionality, but what does that actually mean? Because I think it's important to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, intersectionality for me is the various things that make a person it's what makes you an individual, whether that's maybe socioeconomic status, maybe it's the color of your skin, cultural background. These are all the different identities that come to make a person unique in who they are. And that's so important. That's something that we value here at Element Q. That's why we do several different identity-based groups. And it's not necessarily gender identity. Gender identity is one, but also what are the other things that make you you? We have fun ways of kind of pulling that in and sharing those experiences with one another.
Yeah, because I really do want to believe, and my experience has shown me that it is true. When we meet folks that have different life experience, we expand, right? Regardless of who that is or what that is. And if we can create some safe containers, I'm actually just thinking about a group that I facilitated at Element Q some weeks ago, and I looked around the room and thought, wow, these folks have really different life experiences. And one of the things that's beautiful about coming together in a community is that we can share those. And if I'm willing willing to actually hear and learn, there's an expansion that can get created through that.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I've seen a lot of folks kind of expand as they've been here, and it's beautiful to watch. It's beautiful to see how those different intersectional identities mingle with one another, and maybe how sometimes how they clash sometimes. That absolutely does happen, and how you can grow from those clashes at the same time.
Yeah, I mean that is so fascinating, right? Because when we think about mental health, we might have just a certain little box of what mental health is, but we all know that wellness is so much more, physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. And those aspects can get addressed while in treatment in a healthy and a supportive treatment environment, which I know Element Q is. I'm curious if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about your own journey. And I was thinking about assumptions that can be made, right? Like I might meet you, Keoni, and I might have assumptions about you and then get to know you. And I'm like, oh, it's different than I might have realized. And that's also obviously one of the benefits of being open and willing to like actually meet someone where they're at and then learn from them.
Yeah. So, you want me to talk just kind of like about my background?
I would love that. Yeah.
Okay. So, wow, my journey. I didn't transition until probably about a couple years ago. So, for my whole life, I'd been living as a cis woman, and I identify now as non-binary transmasculine. And for me, it was, I always knew I was uncomfortable with certain parts of my body, but I had never met other folks that had transitioned. I hadn't researched it. I hadn't thought about anything. And it wasn't until I started talking with folks that had transitioned that it started to click in my head of all the things um, that didn't feel right about how I was presenting in the world.
Mm.
And for me, I transitioned a few years ago, got top surgery, started hormones, and have not looked back. It has been amazing. And also, like my background, just in general, I, you know, joined the military somewhat young, served in the army. After I got out of the army, I ended up working corporate world for a while. And it wasn't until I started having talks with other folks that had transitioned out of the army that were struggling with mental health that I really felt a pull to join the field. Um, and then I went back to school and got my degree in social work, and I've been doing that ever since. And now I'm the director of operations here, and it finally feels like I kind of get to give back in all the different ways. Like working, having my own gender journey, and just always wanting to be a part of and build community wherever I go. That has always been a passion of mine. So being able to get back to this community is super important to me.
Well, I love that because talk about intersectionality, someone who has the experience of being in the military, and I know not everyone has the exact same experience when they go into the military, but there is some similarity there that might be really different than mine, growing up in my little Midwest, middle class suburban life, right? And so I love that because once again, as we come together, and one of the things that I've always been aware of going way back, and obviously if we go back, because I'm obviously slightly older than you, if we go way back, like we didn't, trans wasn't even hardly a thing back in the day. I mean, it did exist. As a matter of fact, like I'm thinking about like when I first started coming out and going to bars, there were a lot of trans women around, but it was just, we had different names for it. And they were
Yeah.
ironically drag performers. So there was confusion. And I'm thinking about like, the gay male experience of that. And like, there was a marginalization in some ways because there was really a bias toward masculinity within the community. And I have a lot of theories about that, within gay male culture that we end up, sort of eroticizing hyper masculinity a lot. And then, these trans women who weren't even called trans women then, but many of them were also performers, right? That was just my first experience. And like, I remember just thinking, oh, wow, this is really different than my little, I mean, I didn't grow up in a small town, but I was in the Midwest and I moved to a city. So it was like my mind was like, oh my gosh, culture. It was fascinating to me. And then I think about like all the different experiences our community has had over the years and all these different little segments of the community. One of the things I'd like to lean into is culture because I think about, for example, working with a lot of folks who come from different cultures, uh,
Hmm.
people of color who maybe Latino culture, Asian culture, and there's a lot of different levels of homophobia or acceptance within a lot of different cultures, right? And I think
Yeah,
that comes in with intersectionality too. It's like not only is a person working with their gender identity and working through that outside and then inside doing the inner work, but then there's
yeah,
also culture that comes into play.
definitely. And we get to watch that play out here too. Like some folks can like mention something about their own cultural background, and somebody else will be like, "Oh my gosh, that also happens here." I mean, um, I myself am, I have a black father. My mother is an immigrant from Japan, so I mean, that also brings in a different flair. And so many of our clinicians have various backgrounds, and it's really nice to see how we can kind of like intertwine that. Um, we also try to like be mindful of like some folks that are looking for those cultural backgrounds. They're like, I really want to get in touch with this side of myself. Maybe they didn't have a chance to explore that. So we have folks that are looking for resources for them so that they can get in touch with that side, find other folks with a similar background, and maybe develop a community based on that as well.
Yeah, and one of the things I love is we can celebrate and honor those differences, and at the same time, where we can meet, where we have a way of relating that's beyond the culture as well, is a beautiful thing. And I think sometimes people are like want to bypass that piece, but it's an important piece, right? To
Yeah.
honor and what I love about the work that we do, and anytime we're in a healing community is we do get to find commonality as well. Like, oh, I didn't realize how much I would have in common with a person who I perceive to be different than I am.
Yeah. Dang, it's so important. It's just really important.
Yeah, say more about the importance. I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear more.
I think for a lot of folks, especially in the healing space, especially with mental health healing, being able to find folks that can relate, that can, and maybe they have developed ways of coping or problem solving with, even if they have a different cultural background, it can be relatable though. Like it may not be exactly the same, but other folks can learn from one another of like, oh, well, this didn't work with my family. Um, Maybe this will work from this person or something else. Like especially in group spaces, they're like it's kind of like that collective mind, right? You can pull different from different things or and kind of come up with your own solutions or um, figure out things that may work for you and learn different ideas. And it's beautiful to watch. Um, and sometimes it really works out in their benefit and the look when they come back the next week and they're just like, so I tried something that I heard from another group member and it worked. And then you're just watching them just beam, or maybe it was a rough week and it didn't work out the way they wanted to, but it feels good to at least have tried something different to see if that worked for them too.
Yeah, and it's interesting as you were talking, I was thinking about how even if the life experience is different or subtly or sometimes dramatically different, where we meet is the felt sense of the experience, right? So like I might not have the exact same experience as someone else who I'm sitting in the group with, but when we get to the emotional part or the impact of that or the feelings or what I'm carrying with me, that's I think the place where we start to relate at a deeper level. And to me, that's where the deeper healing actually comes in. So when we create a space to be authentic and be open, because I think it's easy to get stuck on just the differences of life experience. And I love honoring those. And then when we can get to, oh, and yet in the midst of that, we relate at a deeper level. I mean, I even think about working in treatment for many years for folks that are not LGBTQ that have exposure. And I'm thinking about one of my earliest experiences. I'm not going to get into the whole story, but we were in network with these bus driver and truck driver unions in New Jersey and Rhode Island, and we were in the Bay Area, and so there was this mix of people, right? And I remember one graduation, these guys made this huge card out of all glitter, and they said to our first gay friend and named the client, "We love you," right? And they had literally never met a person who was LGBTQ. And even though, of course, we at Element Q honor the space of holding within the community a safe space that doesn't have that, sometimes being around people who we perceive to be different can also be really healing.
It really is. I mean, um, I've had I've watched as some of our folks have come through here, like have never experienced being around other trans folks, have never experienced being in a queer space, however identifies as queer. And so watching that healing grow within that small, tight community that's here at LMAQ is amazing to watch because you see them start to really be their authentic self, to be comfortable in their own skin, to be able to express things that maybe they weren't always able to express. And it's fun when they'll say it themselves, right? They'll be like, I never was able to do this outside of here.
Mm.
I was never able to be comfortable in queer spaces. And now the environment that's been created at Element Q has been so healing because I feel like I can be my authentic self in all of its messiness and in all of its like organizedness, or like just being organized as a human being. Like you can put on the face that you give the world, but you can also be the person that you are behind closed doors here. And it's beautiful to watch that play out.
Wow, it's interesting, Keoni. I've never really thought of it quite like that. I mean, obviously, I've thought about that through our client's lens, but I never really put myself in the equation. And I'm going back to my earliest journey. And in my case, I got sober first. That was my first exposure to support groups. And I didn't go to treatment, but I was going to support groups. And I remember being terrified of LGBTQ folks. Absolutely terrible. Well, I was also really terrified of men, and that was out of my own unhealed sexual trauma. So men were not safe in general for me. So I
Yeah.
think about like the possibility of being in a healing space early on where it was actually safe to be around other, like in my case, men or gay men, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I sometimes forget how long that journey was for me to feel safe because I felt safer with straight cis women. That's felt what felt safe to me. And I hung out and found that safety for at least a year in my beginning of like my recovery and my mental health journey. And so I think about, it's sometimes so easy to only see things through my current lens. And so thank you for bringing me back to my earlier journey where, I do realize what we're doing and how important it is.
Yeah, no, I'm glad I could bring you back to that. I mean, like like I said, it's something that I'm watching play out now. And I've seen play out here where folks that maybe weren't necessarily comfortable in that environment all of a sudden are like, oh, so this is what it's like. Like there's a realization from clients of just like how welcoming the community can be because this is a safe space here, and that's what we're trying to create, and that's what we really want from LMAQ is for folks to have a safe space to be themselves and be their authentic self.
Yeah,
uh,
and I think that safety creates the opportunity for the deeper work, right? The deeper healing. And so I want to kind of pivot to that a little bit because we're talking about safe space externally, which is so important. And we know we've created that in a beautiful way at Element Q. I know of other spaces that are very safe in that way. And then that creates an opportunity to start doing this deeper work. And I know we
yeah.
use that term a lot. So what does that actually mean? You can share it from your own journey, things you've seen in clients, like what we do at Element Q. What is that? And obviously, everyone's journey is unique, but there's also commonality in that. So I'm curious about your thoughts around that topic.
I think deeper work for myself, I'll say for myself first, is about learning the things that maybe I didn't know. Like for me, it was my gender identity. I, like I said, I spent many years. It wasn't until a few years ago where I was just like, oh, this starts to make sense. And it made sense in the sense of like, I've met other folks that have gone on this gender journey, and it hearing their experiences made me realize what it was that was also going through my mind but didn't know.
Mm.
So deeper work can be in that sense. It can also be healing from different traumas that I've like myself or that other folks have had in their life. It can be uh, deeper work can vary from person to person. It depends on what they feel like they need. Maybe it's I know I have, let's say, this mental health diagnosis, but I have no idea what it means. I have no idea how to live with that. I don't know what that looks like or how that changes how I interact with the world. Um, and just learning to understand that in a place where you're not judged, where you can let that happen and figure out how it is to cope and adjust and work on your mental health and how that will help you later on in other outside of here and in personal relationships.
Yeah, and I love where you're going because it's really popular now within the behavioral health community to say we're trauma informed. And one thing that Element Q does, that Monima does, that's really different is we're actually trauma focused, like actually doing deeper trauma healing. And for me, I think about, I think about Bessel van der Kolk's quote, trauma doesn't show up as a memory, it shows up as a reaction. And that
Mhm.
reaction can sometimes be a mental health diagnosis. And the root of it is often trauma. When we look at someone who has borderline personality disorder diagnosis, right? I think a lot of times people focus on the diagnosis and the symptoms of the diagnosis, which obviously we work with, but we're
Yeah.
also inviting people to say, well, what's the root cause of this? When was this trauma that caused us to be, hypersensitive and on guard? And I mean, it's working in mental health and being in the mental health space, that's one of the common things that happens. There's a lot of reactivity, and it's because people are trying to manage something that
Yes.
feels unmanageable within.
Hmm. Absolutely. It's, and that's something that they can learn how to to work with here, right? And learn the coping skills to manage kind of how those reactions play out. Something that I've seen with clients is at, at first it's like, oh, well, nothing's changing. And then a bright light will click on, and it's like, oh, wait, I learned how to handle that emotion. I know that's coming from um, this portion of my childhood, or it could be various different things. Or sometimes it's like, um, I, some clients want to learn how to manage their symptoms, and then they're like, they start learning the coping skills through various classes. Sometimes it's just, and then that interaction within like the groups, it's like they'll have a reaction from somebody or from something somebody said, and then we can actually play that out in real time, and then they're like, oh, there's kind of like this light bulb that comes on later, maybe not immediately, but with us there to kind of guide them and point out certain things. We're like, hey, you really managed that really well, and folks are amazed in that moment of like, oh yeah, I did do that. I did that thing. I managed my symptoms. I managed to cope with this, even though before I would have had a different reaction to it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that because then with through that awareness, right? Because I think so often people certainly was true in my journey, and I see a lot of people really thinking that the world is happening to them and this is happening, and they're in this constant state of reactivity, and we know the nervous system is really on guard. And so when we slow that nervous system down a bit through these safe groups, through containment of, actually seeing someone, because ultimately that's really it, right? I see you. I'm not here to try to fix you or change you, but to just hold this. And that awareness, that deeper awareness is like, oh, I know now why this keeps happening in my life. I'm accountable now, but not I'm not blaming myself, but I'm accountable, and I realize the root of it. And somehow, just even in that awareness is such a dramatic shift, because then I say, oh, I know why I keep doing this. I'm trying to protect something here, right? I'm trying to protect something that I've been trying to protect for sometimes decades, and to start to gently thaw out and unravel that so that we can look at the root, get back and do some of that healing. So, and that's really to me what that group healing process is like, oh, I just did this thing and people didn't really, get up and leave or judge me or hurt me in some way, right? Because that's the fear. Oh, I can actually share what I'm really feeling. And then that the awareness becomes deeper and deeper of like, oh, as I start to heal this, I find myself in less reactivity and I'm no longer coping or managing. I'm actually living in a very different way. And I think that's the process of healing that we offer.
Yeah, and something to that I love that we do here at LMNQ is, yes, we have our regular like coping skills groups, things like that. We have our process groups, and we also have our somatic groups. So oftentimes, and what I've seen a lot of our folks kind of do is they'll have a really tough session. Like, for example, let's say they had a trauma focused group, and then after that, we'll have a process group. And we do this on purpose because that we're going to bring up all these emotions and all this, and you're going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be some uncomfortableness in there. And then we're going to process that.
Yeah.
We and then after that, there's always a somatic group, and these are done on purpose. That somatic group gets us into our body and gets us to release all of that, those emotions, whatever that looks like. And it's so beautiful to watch in those somatic groups because some folks really come out and they're like, you know what? I felt anger and I haven't felt anger in years, sort of thing. Or I came out and I let all of that grief go. And it's beautiful to watch that happen and hear those things and honestly see them come out with like a calmness to them as well.
Yeah, because when we allow ourselves to actually get back into our bodies, right? Because so many of us have been escaping from the emotional experience, and part of
Yeah.
that reactivity or that nervous system kind of freezing, fight, flight, or freeze, right? That whether we're freezing or we're running or we're checking out or all the things that we do when we allow ourselves to those emotions come up, and I've been called the emoto rooter before by clients that they actually some of my clients made t-shirts ones that said welcome to the emoto rooter, right? So there is a space where we can actually touch the trauma enough to bring this stuff up, and then what do we actually do with that, right? And you and I have seen people that need to leave group, and one of the things I love is that there's a triage person waiting for them to like just hold them, not fix them or change anything, because I think the deeper work for me, and this I've seen this a lot in treatment over the years, working in the field for almost 20 years. Sometimes I think we want to keep our client, well, of course we want to keep our client safe, but I think sometimes that gets, it shows up as like we're not going to do anything to activate anyone. And the truth is, if we're doing really great treatment, people do get activated. We're not intentionally trying to do it, but it will happen. And then it's more, how do we work with that? How do we hold space? And I love that you're bringing the somatic piece in, because that's the integration of it. Like, oh, and it's not a teaching, right? It's more of an experience of like, oh, I did sit with this. This did come up. I did leave. I did process it. Then I went into either acupuncture or any of the holistic modalities or into a somatic group, and I could actually be with myself. And maybe it's overly simplistic to say, but I think that's the number one wellness tool we can have, is learning to be present with ourselves, even if it's just for 5 minutes, because many of us haven't done that for decades.
Shoot, many of us still don't do it. Let's be very honest. A lot of it, and a lot of folks just, who wants to sit in that uncomfortability?
Right.
Nobody does. It's not comfortable. We want to be comfortable. And I think that's just natural human instinct. Like, I don't want to sit with uncomfortable. And then having to do that and realizing that you did it and then letting that out within our somatic groups or within acupuncture, or even like our trauma informed yoga, of just being that mindfulness and being in our bodies is so helpful, because now we can actually feel where it is that's kind of being hung up in our body, where that tension is at, where that anxiety sits at and that uncomfortableness is at. For some folks, I've heard like it was in my throat and I couldn't let it out. And then all of a sudden they let it out. And that can look different for different folks. And it's really great to see that. And it's a good reminder for us as well as clinicians to like, hey, we got to sit with our own uncomfortableness too. We have to deal with this too. And what does that feel like for us, right?
Well, and you're speaking to something that's like the heart of my work, right? Because I think a lot of times clinicians will move into the hero mode or the fix it mode or the keep everyone safe mode, which obviously, and I want to be clear what I'm saying. I'm not, of course, we're keeping our clients safe, but it can manifest as like, don't do anything to like bring up this stuff. And I often wonder if it's because I, as the clinician, I'm not comfortable doing it for myself, right? So I like to be provocative and say the only thing I really need to do for my clients is my own healing. Because can I be in a space where I can see someone get activated and allow that to be, knowing that, again, we're not trying to get that to happen. We're not forcing that, but it will happen, right? It will happen as people are talking about their deeper feelings or, the emotions that are present. And that to me is truly holistic treatment. It's physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. And it's allowing someone to have that experience without becoming the fixer or the shifter of that experience, but to be able to hold that. Because I agree, many humans, not just people in treatment for mental health or addiction, haven't really learned how to sit with themselves. And, perhaps culture, the way it's moving, we're doing less and less of that. So I think we need to be more conscious of it, bottom line.
Definitely. And I would agree with you. The culture is kind of moving away from that. It definitely isn't here to like, nobody wants to be uncomfortable. And yet we're going to have uncomfortable experiences. So how do we manage that if we can't deal with the uncomfortableness?
That's right. Wow. Well, believe it or not, we're at the end of our time together. I'm gonna, in a moment, I'll turn it back to you if you want to say anything in closing, so you can be sitting with that. I've loved this conversation. I always love our conversations because we don't come in with an agenda. We just see what shows up. And honestly, that's what we do in treatment, right? We come in with an idea of what we're going to do, but the deep work that we do with clients is really just seeing what emerges and holding that. And yes, we process that. Yes, we have modalities we use, but in the end, it's really about human connection. And it's about us being able to allow our clients to have that experience of healing. Sometimes that feels really beautiful and sometimes that can be painful, and we welcome it all as part of the journey. So is there anything you want to say in closing to anyone watching or listening right now? No pressure, Keoni.
No pressure at all. No, if you're in need of LGBTQ focused mental health support, we'd love to be the folks that help you through your journey. I also just wanted to thank you, TJ, for your time, for having me on here, and just having a conversation with me.
Amazing. Well, thank you. And everyone who's watching or listening right now, if this has resonated with you, which I'm sure it has, like, share, subscribe. If there's someone in your life that you think might really benefit from this conversation, go ahead and send it to them. The intention of the Element Q podcast, and for that matter, Element Q Healing Center, is really to have these conversations and to provide a space of deeper connection so that we can, within our community, and within our individual self, do this deeper level of healing. So thank you, everyone. Peace and blessings. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Element Q podcast. It's an honor to walk this path of healing and transformation with you. Remember, the courage and resilience of those who came before us live on in each of us. Let's continue to carry their legacy forward as we support one another in creating a world filled with love, gentleness, and empowerment. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we're building a brighter future, one story at a time. Until next time, I'm TJ Woodward, and this has been the Element Q podcast.